So who are you and what do you do?
I'm Matt Beane, and I study how all of us are learning to deal with the intelligent machines we're throwing into the world of work.
You've got a great new book out called The Skill Code. Saw the title, got very excited about it, read your bio, got even more excited. But I think the most exciting thing, which we talked about already, is the fact that we share a literary agent in Jim Levine. So that's probably, that gave me full
Yeah,
validation that this is a legit piece of literature that's coming out.
right. Yes, no, and quick shout out to Jim. I met a lot of agents in the course of potentially doing this book, and he stood out by a country mile as this incredible blend of just um, ability to see patterns where other humans see noise and just fierce kindness and desire to do good. Just a stunning individual.
Yeah, he's a great person, and he did really solid by me on my first two books. I haven't published in a decade, but I know that if I go back to publishing a book, there's only one place
Yeah.
I'm going to go visit. It's Jim. Tell me a little bit about your world, because everybody's really excited about AI right now for real powerful reasons. We can get into that for sure. But you've been thinking about this human robot interaction for a really long time. And before we get into the challenges we're all facing, which is the crux of what you're doing with the skill code, walk people through a little bit what's happened in your world, how you got interested in it, how we got here.
Yeah, sure. So I think the fair and fun answer is that since I was four, really, I have still the original copy of the Usborne Guide to Robots and Computers and the Future, which is a big, bigger than 8.5 by 11 glossy book with all these hand drawn images and so on, just imagining the future. So you'd sooner find me glued to the carpet on a sunny Sunday, going through that book for the 11th time than many other activities. So that's my mom would say that's definitely part of the story, and I think that's right. I think the practical, ignition moment for me, career-wise, to get heading in this direction was I was a partner in a small consulting firm that worked on group and team dynamics for executive teams, typically, and I was around for the advent of the BlackBerry and the smartphone in the midst of that work. We specialized in helping groups have touchy conversations more productively, and boy, did the advent of a communication device in your pocket change how folks had conversations. So that was a big sort of there's a moment, and so I got curious about it, and I started to read. Of course, I'd always been a trying to keep up, but then it was right around then that all of these books, some popular, some not, were out there and making a few waves. So one that really did catch my attention for good and for bad was Ray Kurzweil's The Singularity is Near.
Yeah.
That was like 2007, 2008. I remember I was traveling for work. I was on a beach in Thailand reading that book and thinking to myself, we're going to live to see some really big changes, like capital B. Um, Definitely not everything in this book is going to come true, probably, but then the sort of fused link that made me think there was a work future for me there was that I became familiar with Sandy Pentland's work. He's at the Human Dynamics Lab at MIT. And at the time, he had students who had built a physical device, a little badge you wear around your neck that they called a sociometric sensor, which had all kinds of sensors on board, infrared, an accelerometer, a microphone, and so on. And based on a tiny slice of data from human interactions where people were wearing these badges, they could predict amazing things about
Yeah.
what was going to happen in group interaction, like speed dating results within 4 seconds, that kind of thing. But the one that linked to me was that they built that system, they used it, and they gave everyone a cell phone-like display in front of them in a group meeting, a real team that was having a meeting on a complex topic. And it showed you in real time how well you were doing at balancing the conversation amongst all participants and
Right.
who you were taking turns with, right? Who you were handing the mic to and so on. And the practical effect of that was it was leveling participation in groups immediately because everybody had the same information and nobody wanted to be that hog, even in conversations that had previously had someone who didn't mind hogging the mic, so to speak. And that was, I'm not joking. I mean, some months and weeks, that was like 40% of my job. I would show up to an executive team and I would say, hey, Bob, you've been talking for a while. How about we hear from Jane? That kind of stuff. And I'm like, so I saw this technology. I've been reading Ray Kurzweil, and I was like, my profession has a half-life. Like, yeah. So I volunteered as a research associate for Ray Kurzweil's organization, actually, to help them understand whether the exponential change that he was predicting was continuing. I started to get more into that than my real job. And my wife one day said to me, this is all you talk about. You should just apply to a PhD program. And I said, this is a terrible time for that. She was founding her own business at the time. And she was an executive coach at the time. And she just gave me this executive coach look like, so when's a better time? And that was so then I applied and nuked a perfectly serviceable consulting career to, because MIT let me in, and MIT was my number one choice. Like, this is Camelot as far as I was concerned. So that was the beginning. And within 6 months, when I arrived, in my application essay, I talked about AI, robotics, the implications for how we adapt in this world. And I showed up and I announced right away, like within 6 months, that robots specifically I wanted to focus on, which raised a few eyebrows because also I was interested in those sensors and how we might use them to study team dynamics. But that's the kind of place where, if you announce a clear direction, folks are going to support you. And so they did. And I did my first study of robots getting deployed at work and how it was changing the way people worked and learned in 2011. I was off to the races.
Robots in the warehouse, robots at work, something we've had for a long time. I'm often surprised by how surprised people are when they see the innards of an Amazon warehouse as an example. Technology's definitely progressed, and the speed of which you're seeing things happen, it can be astonishing. What it feels like we're seeing more recently is the anthropomization of these robots, whether it's the Tesla robot, whether it's things we're seeing with Boston Dynamics, it looks like a pet. They're looking more and more human-esque, which takes a step away. Of even if you saw a robot being used in surgery, it does not look like a human hands and things like that. What do you think it is about that part, this science fiction connection to wanting to make them seem more and more human, as if we are the perfect embodiment of how to deliver something?
Right. Yeah, it's fascinating to track. There is historical evidence for that impulse going back at least 2,000 years. And depending on what you look at, like there's a service that Amazon offers called Mechanical Turk. I'm assuming you may have heard of this, where Absolutely. You can hire a bunch of remote workers to do tiny little micro tasks for small amounts of money to do research. Well, the original Mechanical Turk was a physical device that had a human hidden inside of it. So it was supposedly an automata, but there was someone crammed inside this bronze and metal statue to make it seem as if it was alive. So the impulse to build something in our own image that is its own independent and non-human entity is on that score, boring. Like
boring and biblical.
We don't
too.
know. We don't know why. No one can fully explain what it is about the Frankenstein's monster myth, the Mechanical Turk, and up till now, these amazing humanoid robots. They are decidedly and obviously not the most practical choice if you're building a robot to get work done in the world, even if the recent argument, I think, is it's reasonable, is you want a multi-purpose robot now. It's not cost effective it's like building a car, I don't know, 90 to 500 different kinds of cars to suit different driving conditions. No, you want to build one kind of thing that has four wheels that people can have a standardized experience with and can handle many conditions, right? So the car was engineered in that way, more or less. And that's the argument for these humanoid robots now that's getting venture cap, which is, it's we need to be able to build, say, 10 million 1 billion robots to serve humanity's needs given the demographic conversion that's going on. And so the only way to do that is to have it be in a human form factor, because the human environment, and that's actually, you start to slide into, I think, artful BS at a certain point, because do you need 5 fingers? No, obviously not. 3 is proven research-wise to be perfectly sufficient. To type on a keyboard, do you need 5? No, 3 would do just fine. Then again, do you need 2 legs? Legs are very inefficient and costly way to get around. No, come on, folks. Like there was a great head-turning moment more than a decade ago now at the DARPA Grand Challenge, where they had a humanoid robot that had to drive a vehicle, get to a location, get up to a building, open the door, go in, close a valve, walk up some stairs, and go out the exit. And the teams did this with radically different designs, some of which were much more power efficient and had more capability than the strictly humanoid kind. I think it's amazing. And obviously a lot of money and attention is flowing in there, but it's impossible to explain that as just a purely practical play.
But there's something going on with us psychologically, and I feel it more and more in the conversations I have in particular about generative AI tools. And I think it's very similar to what I hear in robotics. This weird feeling of, yeah, but obviously we're the best. And so if we're the best, we have to make it like us. And I'm constantly fascinated by the lack of humility we have in thinking this. Is it because we're fearful that we can be so easily replaced? Is it because, and I feel this is it, I feel like we are getting ever close to realizing that all this work we might have done for school and in the workplace to accelerate our careers and be better or different than others is somewhat becoming homogenized by seeing these tools be able to do it very well. Like, I don't even care if it's intelligence or not. Even if it's faking it, it's doing a damn good job of it.
Yes. Well, and to be perfectly fair, I think in many cases they do a terrible job, and a deceptively terrible one, where you think the output is good, and then that lawyer submits the case and turns out that this, and academics are falling prey to this too now. Oh, that paper looks good. And, buried in the second paragraph says, as a large language model, I can't blah, blah, blah. And they aren't paying attention and they click submit. Yeah, but I think it's a strange combination of a lack of humility, but also a lack of ambition. So yes, on the humility front, like we've built, I don't know, I've used the term cognitive prosthesis recently, and I think that's not too far away from the truth. It allows you to do more, better, faster, by a fair shake in many cases. Not always useful. You have to get training to use it and so on. But we are also horrifically pedestrian in how we try to use it. Most folks will pick up these tools, and this is no strong judgment against those folks. Like, look, if you want your resume that much faster and you want a B+ effort where you could have done an A- on your own in 10 times the time, more power to you. And those uses are valuable. That's probably most of what folks are doing. At the same time, you can do things that literally would have been impossible for you to do before, that you never would have even considered doing. Right now, if you wanted to, I've issued this kind of impossible challenge to my own students, and they have absolutely blown their own minds at what they can build, like non-coders building useful web apps open and available to the public in 3 weeks with no coding experience. They wouldn't have in a million years even tried. Recently, I challenged someone they loved the Tracy Chapman, Luke Combs, the duet at the Grammys.
Car, yeah.
And they said, well, I wonder what it would be like if it was Bruce Springsteen and Tracy singing that. And I challenged them to make it happen with AI. And they're like, I have no idea how to do. I'm like, you can do this. Are you willing to burn several days? And they went off and did it. So scientists have been doing this for years now, like 5 years, 4 years, inventing new questions to ask, ways of collecting data, analyzing that data that they wouldn't have even tried before. So the resume and cover letter and homework temptation is sucking the oxygen out of the room when I think at least more of it can and should be focused on what new thing could I do that how am I now empowered to leap over tall buildings in a single bound now?
Yeah.
We are.
But we've seen this. I mean, that doesn't frustrate me even, because I was in the search engine business in the late 90s before Google, and saw people typing in searches like car
Yeah.
and going, well, there's no really good search results. It takes
There we
both
go.
this interaction of information access and understanding what it can be. I don't
Yes.
fault people for the state of current generative AI, because knowing where I'm at in my prompting and what I'm using it for, I'm getting to a point where I'm essentially a ghostwriter editor for my own avatar. I mean, and that's using it in really complex ways, not just write a newsletter and things like that. So,
Sure.
you know, it's hard. It's hard to, like, it goes back to even this designing of robots that look like humans. I don't fault people for
Yep.
that, although I would have thought that the designers of robots would have intuitively realized there's got to be a better system than maybe the human body for how to deliver the efficacy of the work.
Yeah, and I did actually write a scientific paper about this. I think at least on some level, and I don't mean this or any of what I just said cynically, by the way. So I'm with you in having compassion for everyone and what they're doing, but the whether or not a humanoid robot can get the job done, so to speak, physically in the best way is part of the equation as to why you might build one. But another part is how much venture capital you can acquire, how fast to build something. And it's a very symbolically potent thing to do. It attracts a lot of attention for, for reasons that we were just discussing. So it's very astute choice, actually, to do that if what you're hoping to do. And I've talked with one company who's very explicit about this. They said, look, we're building humanoid robots because we want to collect data that a system like that, a lot of data from a system like that, to train new classes of foundation model, not a large language model, a large embodied model that we can use for other purposes. So, but the only way we can do that is to get, say, 10,000 of them, 20,000 of them deployed in the real world. Mm-hmm. That will produce the data. That's what we're after. We're not after these. We don't have any illusion that these robots are going to be practically useful. That was an interesting argument, actually. Yeah. I could see that, because you need really rich and wide data set to build a new foundation model.
The other argument that I understand is just architecture. We build houses with homes and hallways and stairs and basements, and perhaps just to get these things to navigate it, it has to carry a similar form. Although I will guess that there must be some type of tread system that can rip up the stairs faster than a human. But still, I get that idea too.
Yeah. Yes,
in the environment. Exactly. Let's talk a little bit about the skill code. What was really interesting to me is I found myself vacillating back and forth as the pages were going on and on around, is Matt trying to help me understand how to survive in this new world or how to thrive in this new world? And what I mean by that is there needs to be a thought here around, one, how do we outpace these machines or technology? Maybe might be a thought. Or is it we're never going to outpace these machines? So what do we do to circumvent the fact that technology is going to constantly push this innovation to replace us? And I don't know if I could land on a real good answer to that after reading the book for myself.
Interesting. Yeah, I'm kind of agnostic on that front. I think the basic job of the book is to give the reader the best available research on how we build skill at work. First, that's sort of first third. The second is to say, and by the way, that is not formal training.
Yeah,
that is not
we'll
school.
Talk about that. Yeah,
but it's informal and taken for granted. Sort of collision through collaborative work, vicarious learning, really. The middle third is like we're unintentionally nuking that process by the way that we're deploying technology. And if you really believe that, then yeah, there's $1 trillion threat washing up on the shores that's about kneecapping the next generation of talent. We're sacrificing that sort of the involvement of those junior folks, the novices, for a short run productivity boost. And the third part of the book is providing evidence and argumentation to say, but it could be the opposite right now. In fact, here's spaces where I found in my research where, in fact, the opposite is happening systematically, not accidentally, not because of some lone hero, but new practices, new ways of building technology, putting it to work, work practices themselves, so that you can build skill better than ever before. It's imperfect, it's incomplete. And so if you buy the flow and the logic of the book, it's enough to give you a sense of, for yourself and for those you care about, if you want to keep learning and growing and being valuable in the world, no matter what technology can do. It's agnostic about that. Assume it will get better, worse, doesn't matter. In a certain sense, it's like if you yourself or your organization, your profession, your occupation want to continue to be relevant, valuable, earn dignity and respect and a paycheck, then these are the things you should be looking for in your work to make sure they're healthy. This is how you should deploy technology so that it enhances those things. That's the goal of the book. And it's interesting, the more I talk with folks about it, the more I realize that it depends on where you sit, what you see, what your context is like, as to what aspect of that argument is really going to ignite for you. Like, some folks read it, and there's a moment in the book where I say, does this have you worried? And people say, I slam the book shut and yell out loud involuntarily, yes, it does, Matt. What the heck? Whereas other folks are much more entranced by the back third, and in fact, the last chapter in particular of the book, saying like, okay, but what's possible? What can we do now that we couldn't before? In fact, we have this rosy picture of how informal learning happens. Like, it's overly romanticized, like working shoulder to shoulder in the operating room or in a kitchen or out on the beat as a cop or what have you. And in fact, in many cases, it's toxic. In ancient Greece, there's archaeological evidence of like notes written home to mom from an apprentice in a stonemason's shop, where they're like, I'm getting beaten, whipped every day. I'm not learning anything. This guy's a jerk. So I think we have a grand opportunity to make things better than they were before using tech, and some folks cotton more onto that. So I can see why, taking a look at the book, it's kind of unclear. Because I myself have a mixed mind. It's not as if I think it's guaranteed and necessary and perfect if we lean into tech to make all these things better. I think in certain ways the status quo is okay. It's just, I don't think we should settle for it. Like, there are good things going on, obviously. I've never been a black or white kind of a thinker. Real research with real people in the real world, which is the kind that I do, always involves nuance. There are always exceptions to whatever rule you're going to find. There's no single story that explains everything. The exceptions are always useful to study, but then again, they are exceptions. Let's not romanticize them,
Yeah, we tend to do that too. I talk about this a lot, this idea of we take the case study as some kind of benchmark when in truly it's an anomaly. Success is very much an anomaly, but we put them on such high pedestals that it's so difficult to function or figure out why did something work. We had this a lot in my early days of my digital agency in the 2000s around viral. What makes something viral? This idea that, well, if you do this, or we're an agency that can use analytics and tell you how things, and every time I saw this, having a further background in the music business, I could tell you that we had musicians who were brilliant songwriters, amazingly talented, had the best managers, got major record deals, the best producer you could imagine. Album comes out, millions being spent, complete stiff. And to this day, I would look at it and go, one of the best albums ever, but didn't click. And I always hated that in business, this idea that these case studies become some type of system that everyone can just replicate.
Yeah. And this is, thankfully, I got good training in that department at MIT.
I could tell.
Because And this literally happened to me, by the way, in my dissertation. So I for a year and a half was out there in operating rooms studying the difference between robotic surgery and traditional surgery and how people were learning to do either one. And I came back to my committee and I said, I have been through all the classes, by the way. I am a grade A idiot on this front. And I said, look, I just found out that it's really, really hard to learn how to do robotic surgery. And here's why. And they just said, well, that's like a 40-year-old finding, Matt. We should expect things to be difficult when new technology arrives. Learning new techniques takes a while. So that's interesting, but it's not new insight. And I said, well, yeah, and I found 3 residents across 5 hospitals who seem to have really learned how to do robotic surgery well, really fast anyway. And they seem to be doing it in the same way. And they're like, oh, now that is interesting. We've never had a study of people in spite of the turbulence that comes with early tech.
Right.
If you could find 10x the people like that, and find out that without consulting with each other, independent of each other, they were doing the same things to get ahead, and those things were new, that's a scientific discovery. So then I had a year left in my dissertation, and that was the rest of my dissertation. So I didn't just end up with a case study of a few residents who happened to be doing some stuff that worked. It was across 18 teaching hospitals, and I was blinded to who I was talking to. Like, were they good or were they not, or just average? And in fact, it was about 1 in 8, 1 in 10 of them were doing precisely the same 3 things in the abstract in roughly the same 3 sequence, and they were not consulting with each other. And those were the 3 things that contributed to their skill development. And different hospitals, different attendings, different training, different schooling. That was stunning to discover. And I kind of wiped the sweat off my brow, like, okay, lucky bet. But that's what it takes. You can't just take one case study. You have to say, okay, the same success factors have to be showing up for very different actors in very different settings. And they can't be sharing information with each other about what works and what doesn't. Then maybe you've got your hands on a theory as to why something goes viral. Maybe.
The thesis of the book, The Skill Code, is the way in which we can comport ourselves in a world where we have a lot of uncertainty about what will be either some form of automation or even the replacement of humans. Why I find this interesting is because your experience in having it work with robots and machines, I think, is one part. Where I think things get very interesting and why the book was so compelling to me, something that I'm grappling with in my conversations that I have every week here, is this idea that it feels like this level of technology is very much coming for the knowledge worker, that
Yes.
we are roboticizing knowledge work. What do we see? I think we see things that you and I would probably agree with, which is you could be a middle manager who achieved a very high degree in school that manages a lot of people. But ultimately, if your functions day in and day out are quite repetitive, this is the type of stuff it likes to eat for breakfast. And so that panic that you're talking about, where someone slams the book down and goes, "Ooh, I don't like that question," I think very much illuminates this topic that people are very much grappling with. So we talked about the idea of an apprenticeship being core, and I love that because I talk about this a lot. And you had even mentioned earlier this idea of collisions through collaborations. Collisions happens to be one of my favorite words. I love the story going years back where Steve Jobs designed the Apple HQ to have bathrooms in certain places so people would have to walk and collide with, like, all those stories I get all like giddy and excited about. Then we had the black swan of COVID. And when you talk about this younger generation and how they're going to do it, I think it applies equally to anybody who's just in the workforce. People have to have a vision for what it is.
Yes.
And we've solved for it a little bit. You and I are having this conversation over technology, which is lovely. I would still say to you, and again, I'm trying to check myself as potentially being in what we call the olds, that it's much better when we can sit down and do this in person. That there is a value difference of programming in an hour that you and I are going to spend chatting versus we are working together and I can hear all of those things. But yet there is technology that is changing the dynamics of this. I'm wondering how you felt about the actual idea of the book in thinking about a lot of people are thinking 3 days a week back at the office or feeling that they can do this by Zoom. It's nice to be agnostic, but I'm feeling, and again, I don't know if this is the olds,
Yeah.
that it's a much slower, harder process when we're not all in it.
Yeah. No, listen, I hear you loud and clear. I've, as you might imagine, given the book coming out for the last year and a half or so, I've been talking a lot more to corporate groups about these topics. And it was about 8 months ago or so. I finished sort of the first talk, 9 months, about the book specifically, about these topics. And after talking about the threat to this sort of informal apprenticeship, lowercase a apprenticeship, sort of mentor and novice or expert and novice kind of model, senior exec at one organization just he literally did this typical thing of pounding his fist on the table and said, "You have just given me all the ammunition that I need to mandate everybody come back into the office."
This
right?
is exactly what I was thinking. Yeah.
Right. And I said, yeah, good luck with that.
Right.
Right. Now, that was I tend to have a sort of a flip, cynical voice on the inside and a candid one too. But the reality is that the organizations that have tried to get the toothpaste back in the tube are losing talent. That may turn out to be a viable model. The question really that for a savvy leader of an organization who's wanting to be effective on all dimensions as much as possible is to figure out, what was it about face-to-face interaction that added value? Ensure that you're very, very clear about that, and then fight for those things, not face-to-face interaction per se. That will end up manifesting as face-to-face interaction a whole bunch, sure. But as much as it used to be, I highly doubt it. And by the way, there are probably some new things you can do that are unfamiliar to you as an old. I'm not saying you're an old. I'm not saying I'm an old.
We
but
are
the point
olds,
is,
Matt.
we all of us are old now. All of us, because the world has been broken apart and reformed 3 times in the last 4 years.
Right.
And so all of our mental models about what's correct, beautiful, and right, how we ought to go about our jobs, and so on, that is all subject to change now. We all need to flex. So that's what the first third of that is explicitly why I designed the first third of the book the way that I did. Why I call this the skill code is the conditions that allow you to build skill. And what it takes for them to be healthy. I offer 10-point checklists in each, and none of them make explicit reference to face-to-face or not. None of them make reference to any technology. So we need the tools to be able to fight for face-to-face when it's really critical and know why we're fighting for it. Because then you can grab other kinds of interaction that complement it really well.
I guess my struggle with this is, and I struggle with this genuinely.
Yeah.
We see research. We're seeing things like people who go to therapy on the Zoom versus in a room together with an individual are definitely not seeing the same results. We are seeing the stagnation of young people accelerate their careers in relation to the others who are willing to show up and be in the mix. We can say what we want about productivity. What I see on the productivity side is it's not at the same level it's at. And a confusion between losing talent and what I would call losing workers. And I think there's a big difference between the two.
Yes. In addition to that, I would add loneliness. I mean, mental health. The modal response to COVID was to make everything remote, break apart, reformulate jobs and work so that everybody could work from home. That was necessary in the short run.
It was necessary, but it was done with no training. And so we took the habits of the non-trained and applied them as if they are the best way to operate in a remote function. I worked as an agency guy. We had freelance people. I've worked independently. I've been very lucky to have all different types of work. I know how to manage the technology to create a way more engaging experience for myself and the person versus somebody who's got an Outlook calendar mixed with a Zoom link.
Yeah. Yeah, no. And I think we're only barely kind of figuring out what to do on that front. And so, but you're preaching to the choir in terms of, to go back to the beginning of your point, which I think is a core one, is that this wave of automation that is only now close to 2 years old at most, is coming for the knowledge worker in an utterly unprecedented way.
And it's impressive already. As bad as it is now, it's super impressive already.
Yeah. And so I soon will have a piece up in Harvard Business Review explicitly on this, that if you can do your job with no physical contact with another human being and never going into the office, that is the prototypical target for the agent-based versions of these LLM systems that are already in beta testing right now, that can select a goal, come up with a plan, and work independently. Devin is the recent example that folks may have seen online or in the news, and work for long stretches, remember what to do, and get pretty creative about getting the job done. And you can check on them and get a report on how's it going, that kind of thing. And they will creatively troubleshoot. That is not a remote worker, not by a long stretch, but it's heading in that direction.
It's a task worker, though. It is doing tasks.
And they're not simple tasks. Like right now, the garden variety GPT 4.0 or Gemini 1.5, they can work maybe 2 to 3 turns deep before you have to intervene again and help them. Think in the next 6 months, conservatively, maybe a year, we're going to get systems that can work for days on complex work, weeks, and spin up other agents to supervise themselves, build a little virtual organization. So if you're a remote worker, if somebody couldn't tell if a human being were submitting those messages, doing that work, receiving instructions and so on, versus you, if you didn't have accidental interactions with your coworkers that led to discovery, surprise, frustration, confusion, you're going to be more subject to the kind of, and I'm not going to say your job is going to be destroyed or you're automated away. That's a pretty rare occurrence. It will happen to some. But the huge thing that's happening to everybody is job change. Like your job is going to change quite a bit compared to somebody who shows up and has to fit pipe A to pipe B and then solder it shut. I mean, that job is much more stable than the remote worker job, for sure.
So I want to get into that idea because I do have some thoughts about the thought of training as a trade for education. I want to talk about that tangentially, but I want to still swim in this pond that we're in right now, because it's true that when I look at even what Google's planning to do with their AI in its current state, people will laugh at things like it's telling me to put glue in my pizza or to eat rocks or whatever's happening as they integrate into search, which I think is a non-story. It's comical and media-based. But they're talking very specifically about multi-step reasoning for complex queries, the memory factor. So one of the big leaps we saw with GPT 4.0 is the memory component of it, which was available on the agent side, but now it's available in any prompt, and its adaptation of that, which is essentially a form of learning. And then you think about work and go, okay, well, isn't my work just consistently multi-step reasoning for complex queries with memory and adaptation? And then you start thinking like, what else can be put into this equation? And I struggle with this as somebody who thinks about it deeply and reads smart people like you and follows and speaks about these topics too, that I don't know what to say. And even when I was thinking about the book and believing everything that was there, it still left me with that sense of, I don't know if this is enough, Matt. Like, I don't know if I have enough.
Right. So none of us knows. So I think
that's the comfort.
So, and that's because we're in the midst of a historical discontinuity. You know, that you might as well throw an asteroid at the Earth and, or a global plague. We've had one of those. We know what that was like. This is, in a way, a different level or type of disruption, but it's a profound disruption. The arrival of electricity was, in ways, less disruptive than this,
I agree,
because
by the way.
it
There's a
took,
lot of people comparing this to printing presses and steam. And I'm like, this is so beyond that I worry that if that's our limitation or bar, and you
yeah.
see this only as a disruption related to speed, we're in big trouble as a world.
Yeah, and I think speed is the key. At least you could just make the argument based on speed alone. Let's just say that the steam engine and electricity and large language models are equally disruptive somehow objectively. You got 50 to 80 years to adapt to the previous two, and we have had over 700 days barely to adapt to the third one. So if you just say it's the same, it's still dramatic and intense. And oh, by the way, deployed for free to billions of people instantly. Um, it's very clear that just on a sort of volume per unit time basis, the disruption is dramatic. And humans are not good as a species collectively at adapting to big shocks like that.
I had a really interesting conversation on the soccer pitch for our kids with a chief medical officer, somebody who was leading a very respected institution in a very complex field of medicine. And we were talking about the occupation of doctors and the healthcare challenges we have in the world. It's a standard conversation we like to have on the soccer pitch after a hard day's work. But the area that it went to that I thought was most interesting is they were submitting this idea that we have to de-inflate this doctor as God complex of how they get into school, how difficult it is, how so few graduate, and maybe shift it more towards a trade in this world of automation and AI. And I thought this was a very compelling argument that if you're going to abdicate your job, which you could do right now, to a nurse practitioner, they could take your blood pressure, do 90% of the work, and all we're doing is some type of oracle act on top of that. Maybe we need to demystify it and make it more like a trade. I've had this conversation with individuals who feel like they don't know where they're going and they're worried about AI. Find an affluent neighborhood, become very adept at painting or soldering or plumbing, show up on time, smile, have a great team, be clean, you'll be a millionaire. Now, I'm not
Yeah.
saying that AI won't replace that, but there was a confluence here of two concepts that made me think deeply. And again, it really resonated for me when I was reading the skill code that maybe we need to deflate our egos and maybe we need to think of the work as being a trade. And that if we think of it more specifically as a trade, it changes the dynamics of education. It changes
Yes.
the way we teach. It makes it more accessible. And perhaps we have a quicker path to doing something that might outpace the machines versus old infrastructure with all this weird stuffiness to it. Do you see where I'm
Yes.
going with this?
Absolutely. And I think at this point, any attempt at being strategic about outpacing the machines, making sure that you're going to be always differentiable from or value added compared to our technologies is too uncertain a pursuit to warrant intentional effort. It is a
Right.
bad idea. The tech is advancing too quickly, even if it's moving slow, and it's too broadly useful. And so you can spend a lot of time getting quite anxious about what you should do with yourself and your career to try to future-proof yourself with some fixed idea of what this tech is going to become in your mind. And you might get lucky and have that work out, but lucky is the operative term. If you want to approach that question, trades is a great orientation, I think, absolutely, partially because it's about what is needed in the world right now, right? Like really, actually, like, and if you look really actually at what's needed in the world right now, anyway, there is a ton of work that has to do with solving practical problems for folks that you can get paid to go to school for and have no debt when you come out of school and get to work and be I mean, look, I live in Santa Barbara, California. If you are a plumber, you are definitely a millionaire.
Same
Definitely.
here. Same in Canada where I
And
am.
by
Yeah.
the way, you're booked out 12 months and you just say no when people call and ask you for work. You don't say like a consultant does, like, sure, we'll get back to you and get you a proposal. Like, no, the answer is sorry, no. Or I just don't return your call. That said, I think there's the sort of broad, healthy approach is to do scenario planning for yourself, or for your organization, your profession. So sure, have one model of the world where you presume all knowledge work shall be automated. Or the people remaining in knowledge work will supervise high-powered agents that will then spin up virtual organizations of other agents. And so you are now an executive, not an executor. You're not a doer, you're a manager. Everyone's a manager of a hybrid organization. That's one reality. But there are other scenarios too. The other scenario that I think not too many people talk about is these organizations are sued out of existence for intellectual property violation, right? And these technologies are destroyed, taken away, or China takes them all, right? Because they don't have such protections. So there's that whole direction. That's probably worth thinking a little bit about. But what about the scenario where things get dramatically better at the rate that they have been for the next 8 to 12 years? I don't think even you or I, sitting here doing the best we can to stay up to speed, can imagine exactly what that's like, but that's kind of the point, and we all should be doing it to say, all right, what would that world even look like? Like that agent conversation we've just had. Okay, then what's the next implication of that? If it keeps getting better, then you've got agents that engineer the next wave of agents, right? Oh, that tell us the new forms of computational substrate they require, that give us ideas on devices we can manufacture to study and get new data about the world to do better science, that they end up sort of taking the lead, so to speak, and we follow their lead.
The agent and the customer is another agent.
Exactly right. Exactly right. And so that's a very bizarre way to think, but at least putting a few calories on a sunny Sunday afternoon and going, okay, I'm 19 or I'm 34 or I'm 54. Let's say 12 years from now, that's happening. What's important to me? What kind of role do I want to have in this world? And that has to do with discovering what you care about and then trying to go focus on it. I know one guy, an engineer in Germany, who has decided he did okay for himself. And he said, well, I really enjoy repairing old pinball machines. I'm going to just start a business doing that.
I love these stories, Matt. I love these stories.
And he said, and I found this wonderful community of nerds online who show up for conferences, and I make reasonable money, and these are beautiful old machines, and I just love it. And I can pay the bills, not as much money as I used to get, but and this is him. I'm quoting him now. He said, "That was all BS work. I was in a giant company, kind of moving numbers around. This is satisfying." So now I'm not advocating for any particular course, but tuning into what you care about, building the skills and learning what motivates you, trying to and have a plan ready for it all goes away, it stays the course, it gets a little crazier, or it really keeps growing very fast. Those are probably 4 good categories to be. Don't just be aware of them. Give yourself an hour and a piece of paper and think about, like, what am I going to do if that happens? What should I do that would help me be successful in all of those conditions, no matter which one arrive? Those are great. And, we teach that stuff in business schools for businesses, but people can do it too.
I do worry about that self-assessment in the sense of the vast majority of people may find themselves quickly realizing that they are in a BS job or BS work, that the machines are very good at this. The analogy I would give is we think of computers, we forget that humans were computers. Like that was an actual job title before this stuff. And if we keep going down this path, it might be this realization that these agents can do these BS work or jobs, maybe they won't even be needed, but it's going to force all of us to think very differently. I know you're a science fiction fan, as am I. I think you probably outdo me on that based off of what I've read and seen. But this idea of Star Trek always did appeal to me. This idea that everything is taken care of by the system, and we can simply pursue the things that interest us. You want to be a farmer, be a farmer. You want to be a captain on a Starship Enterprise, you can be that too. You can work in engineering, you can work in science. It's very appealing. It gets us to a very scary place for a lot of people that are in a Western civilization, because we start talking about things like universal basic income and being Canadian versus US. that conversation is more common up here because we have more social infrastructures.
Yep.
But this requires a very massive rewiring that I don't know if people have the ability to sustain. And this is the fear. And if we can't sustain that, people like Yuval Noah Harari would have talked about things like extremism and the problem that comes when all of this starts eroding very quickly.
Yeah. And I think we do have a fair amount. I mean, there's a fun conversation that goes on for me as a nerd who studies this kind of stuff with other nerds who also study this kind of stuff. There's one view that
the water's warm. Come in, Matt.
The water's warm. There's a view that says, like, look, we have a lot of excellent science about what happens when new technologies that are disruptive, not just a new version of a technology, but a genuinely disruptive technology arrives, and new general purpose technologies arrive to jobs, skills, workers, welfare, all that kind of stuff. In general, people, people lose jobs, definitely. And that is rounding error compared to what normally happens for most people, which is your job changes to some degree. You've got enough time to pivot and you learn some new skills within a career. If it's too fast, then yes, the cost of shifting is too great and you can end up downgrading job-wise. So that does happen. But you don't lose a job usually, and job categories almost never get taken away.
Correct.
There's two classic great studies, by the way, of switchboard operators back in the day and elevator operators. Right. People would stand in an elevator. Those jobs still exist, by the way, in the world, but they're incredibly rare. So we call them destroyed. So worrying about that kind of destruction is not useful. And if you have enough time, people do pivot. Humans are, if nothing else, adaptable. They seek opportunities to be valuable and respected in the world and to take care of their resource needs and so on. That's just part of how we function. And so you can count on folks to do that. It's just, if this happens really, 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 really fast, then there will be many more losers than we're used to, possibly. And we need to be ready for that. So that's why it's no surprise that people are talking about stuff like universal basic income or reconfiguring our social compact so that folks are more buffered. I generally, you called me an optimist in the beginning. I think that's about right. And I think the human collective responds with creativity and effort in equal measure to the threat or the challenge in front of it.
Yeah.
So if things start to get really intensely scary, bad, difficult, it looks like lots of jobs are going to be really radically reconfigured. I have quite a bit of faith in us as a collective that we're not going to let the ship go down. We're going to change what we need to change fast to meet the challenge. Humanity's amazing at that. It's horrifying. It will be scary, wasteful, harmful. Up close, it will be extremely difficult. The world is can be a very nasty place. But I also know we're not going to just lie down and die. We don't do that.
There's been a lot of discourse around the efficacy of education now.
Yep.
Really dramatic things like, I don't know if we want to forgive all your loans because you decided to study literary arts knowing full well after paying $200,000, you're not going to get a job that can get something even close to that, unfortunately, whether we like that or not. This idea that perhaps schools have really fallen behind in how they're educating what they're teaching. And yet I see so many hopeful things in this. I was thinking more specifically about what you had written in the skill code in relation to a co-op program in business. It's so exactly correct. I happen to live in Montreal where I have access to people like Henry Mintzberg, who is a very big proponent of you shouldn't go for your MBA until you've actually been a manager and worked and understand this versus studying and getting this weird degree. But this idea of a co-op felt very much aligned to a lot of the ideas you're bringing forward. And it made me realize it's so strange how the co-ops are perceived as this adjunct other way of doing it versus why wouldn't we make that the gold standard at this point?
Yeah. It's a strange artifact of history that we've created schools that involve leaving the world of work, sitting in a room in a row of chairs and listening to somebody talk at you, going home, writing some stuff on a piece of paper, bringing it back, getting it graded. Like, that has some little bit of a relationship to doing real work, but let's be real. It's strange. It's certainly not, well, I mean, there's a fantastic amount of research on multiple disciplines that I pulled together in the book, not with an explicit focus on education, but a lot of it is from education, showing that that environment is rather toxic to learning. um, we learn best through participation in real tasks that have social meaning and where we have relationships that we want to cultivate. Like, I want to do good at this job because I look up to you. I want to earn your trust and respect.
Right.
That's part of why we do it. And also, I want to earn the trust and respect of society, of my peers, and so on. The meaning associated with our lives is intimately tied up with the capabilities we build and our skills and so on. And so that's how it ran from, say, 160,000 years ago when we invented language up to the invention of school, which is, depending on how you count, say 4,000 years maximum. So it's this weird blip. And there's been a nice, healthy, since the 40s, 30s in the States, a really strong and small community of folks who said, well, that's a pretty bad idea. So we're just going to do different stuff. We have Montessori schools. We have, I went to a school that wasn't Montessori, but for high school anyway, was really different because I couldn't hack it. Honestly, if I'm being candid, in a normal school, I could not sit in a room. I tried. I
just wanted to get out there and do stuff. I remember being very young and wanting to just do things.
Right. Or just, I definitely am a nerd, and I love to read, love to learn, love to write and think and be challenged to grow in domains that I cared about. I happen to care about a number of them that were taught in school, so I got a little lucky, but I needed a lot more agency around, and also, you're right, exactly, connection between what I'm learning and something valuable happening out there in the world that I can see helps people or improves the world or something. And so I got lucky. I couldn't hack it in a normal setting really that well, and so I found my way, thanks to my parents, to a setting where I got more runway to do that kind of stuff. And so, yeah, I hope and suspect that education, there's a few industrial sectors, education, medicine, you already talked about medicine, government, where we have needlessly rigid and bureaucratic ways of organizing human beings to get stuff done that humans are not going to let go of. We're too bound to the routine. But if machines start to do it 10 times better and 10 times faster, I wonder about what's going to happen to those bureaucratic
I'm big
structures.
on this too. This idea that if you can collect all my data and things I'm thinking, the conversations I've had, and help me be a more effective voter, people think that that's insane. And I look at this I think this would be very interesting because I watch how my politics can shift one as you get older, of course. But just watching people who you would typically think are red or fundamentally blue, or those who are blue are actually quite red. Watching people who are hardcore Democrats, friends of mine, become Republicans before my eyes. It's fascinating to think of what you would do if you could self-analyze the information that is being recorded about you.
Yes, exactly right. Yeah. We are certainly, I can say for sure, I think we both could agree, like we have already, the last 2 years has been a series of wonders, incredible new developments, some of which are scary, uncertain, we're not sure, but still, truly, we are living through interesting times. Let's put it that way. And I don't think it's going to get less interesting.
I agree. So I would be remiss if we didn't talk a little bit about science fiction. What should I be reading? What are you reading?
Let's see. What am I reading right now? I can't remember the title. Oh, Iron Sky. There's a series of books. In the second one now, which I didn't realize there was a series. But really, honestly, these days, this conversation begins and ends with there is no anti-memetics division. Have you read this one?
I haven't. No.
Okay. The author is anonymous, goes by QNTM.
Okay.
That's their name. And this is the most breathtakingly original, disconcerting, compelling piece of science fiction I have read and I've read a lot. There are others, Greg Egan, Ted Chiang. There are some great writers out there that I just can't wait to read whatever they've written. It, but there is no anti-memetics division. I mean, I feel like an alien wrote that, a superior being, somebody, some form of intelligence that's genuinely outside of what humans are capable of. I will say no more.
Well, QNTM, I'm looking now, looks like they have a couple of books.
They do. And this is their
I
magnum
love the
opus.
pricing. 666 is an interesting Kindle pricing for me.
And the book is available for free online too, if you care. They just don't care. They don't seem to care. I genuinely think they might be an alien. Anyway, that book, that's the first one always that I recommend. And if folks say they haven't read it, I say this conversation is over. Run, don't walk. Get yourself a copy, and we'll talk.
Before the conversation ends, I know you're a big guitar guy. I'm a big bass guy.
Oh, cool.
Whose playing has been blowing you away lately?
Let's see. Mancuso is his last name. He's an Italian. I've forgotten his first name. I could go Google him. Matteo, yes.
He's unbelievable. Yeah. In fact, people should look at his interview with Rick Beato because it's amazing.
Yes. That's the place to start. Perfect. Yes.
Yeah, he's great.
Now, that'll just betray that I've always had a fascination with just the edges of what's possible for a human being to do.
Okay, so we're similar. I like weird stuff.
And at the same time, like, I have been sort of on a gypsy jazz jag recently. So, going back to the old Django Reinhardt, Emmett Ray kind of stuff. That just has a special place in my heart. But if I'm sort of picking somebody to watch and just absolutely have my jaw on the floor,
Matteo.
It's Matteo.
I like the way he plays like a bass player, so I like that. If I could recommend back,
yes, please,
the band Polyphia. I don't know if you're familiar with Tim Henson, and again, if you just look at him through Rick Beato,
cool.
It's all part of this genre called djent, D-J-E-N-T. And these are perceived as the next evolution of guitar heroes. There's the guy from Animals as leaders. There's Toast Sinabasi. There's some incredible people. Matteo actually clicks into these like Lego. They are very much out there. And if you're interested in bass player who plays in similar veins, Michael Manring would be another person for you to check out who does things. It's not even a bass at this point with what he's doing. So I would recommend that. But before we go, Matt, tell me the one thing that made you think differently.
I'm going to go ahead and say, coming sort of out of adolescence, I was a pretty cocky kid. I had very clear ideas about how the world worked and why it was that way, and I was pretty sure I was right about that stuff. And so that got broken right about then. And I'm going to credit a few people, it was about education actually, that sort of started me on this path of always be open that you are missing something. Always be curious about other people's views because you definitely don't have the whole perspective. And there was a few books that sort of ignited that for me. And in a way, so that moment of ignition of openness to being wrong is the most important changing of the mind that ever happens. Because before that bit isn't flipped. There's a few people, Neil Postman, Paulo Freire, Leo Buscaglia. I would just name those three guys. Leo Buscaglia, I happen to through, and these are all people who are on the coffee table or in cassette tapes around the house.
Yeah, my parents had the Leo Buscaglia books also, for sure.
And that cocktail of those, Paulo, and this gets back to the education thing, Paulo Freire's Pedagogy of the Oppressed really spun my head around what school is for and what it does. And if it were actually to serve the people involved, what would it look like? And serve the world at the same time. It broke that paradigm open for me, but even more deeply broke open my mind being kind of rigid and closed. It's a lifelong project. Many people will tell you up close, I can still be that rigid and closed, self-centered guy. But those I think were really important people for me to encounter at the right time.
Reminds me of a story. I was walking downtown Montreal. I was studying music post-secondary. So electric bass was my primary, piano was my second. And I was with a fellow musician. I believe he was a guitar major. And we were walking by busy downtown, and there was a homeless person kind of blowing into a harmonica randomly with a cup there. And my friend turned to me and said, "Is that any good?" And what are we talking about here? And he goes, "I don't know, either it's terrible or he's a genius." And we just kept walking. I thought, what an amazing, I mean, it stopped me in my feet. He just blurted out, and we kept walking. And that really shifted this idea of everything you see, you might be able to learn from. Don't make the assumption based off of both social trappings and your own knowledge of whether or not that's real or not. It just, again, toss away line that threw me for a loop.
Yeah. Right person, right time, right moment.
Yeah.
It's a precious breakthrough for everybody.
Yeah. New book is called The Skill Code. It's a great read. Matt, let people know where they can find out more about the book and the other stuff you're writing and creating.
So I'll give them the first chapter of the book right off the cuff, 6pixels.theskillcodebook.com.
Awesome.
That'll both get you that first chapter. You can read it and decide if you want to learn more. It'll also get you to theskillcodebook.com, which has a link to my Substack. It has links to the book and so on, links to my research, the whole nine. It's all sort of right there.
Yeah, all that is great. I don't think you need to just get the first chapter. You just buy the book. It's worth it. Everybody will enjoy it. Matt, thanks so much for your time.
No, it's my distinct pleasure. I was just delighted you reached out.